Good afternoon. How are you? Well, it's another glorious day in paradise. 82 degrees, feels very comfortable. The humidity is about 35%, and the wind's 4 miles an hour. It's so still. Nothing is moving. See? You see anything moving? Nothing, except myself. The analysis of our current besieged circumstance require us, I think, to do diagnoses so we know who we can rely on, who says anything, and have an idea of what we have to do to save our republic from the wannabe dictator, Chubsky, who sits in the Oval Office. And I think a good example of what our difficulty is can be gleaned from the Washington White House Correspondents Association. These are the journalists who cover the White House. And I know about these people because I've spent some time with them, and I've gone to the dinner a couple of times. And I think we've had more special periods in the correspondence than we have presently. Okay? The group was organized in 1914. And it was in response, it's kind of an act of standing for your First Amendment right. It was created in response to a congressional committee who was going to decide who could attend the press conferences of Woodrow Wilson. And access to the government is what the First Amendment is all about. I just overheard some honking. I don't know what it is, but we have a couple of people on the road who don't really pay attention to what they're doing. And it's a dirt road. It's not a speed track. Now, since 1983, the featured speaker at the dinner convened by the White House correspondents has been a comedian. And that's important because of the controversy this year that tells us about the mettle, if you will, of the correspondents themselves. You know, for example, when Reagan was shot and he couldn't attend because he was recuperating, ever the entertainer himself, he phoned in and told a joke about his own shooting. Now, that's the kind of spirited reaction, maybe even humility for a president, that he would make fun of himself. Now, he didn't shame himself, but he made a joke. And by invoking the shooting, he was indirectly saying, I survived it. And a friend of mine who was a top-notch and historic investigator saw him after the shooting. He said it was amazing. His chest was stronger. He was recuperating. He was a powerhouse. Well, Trump is no Reagan in any of those categories. Now, Trump, who has the sensitivity of a gossamer thin angel's wing, can't stand having anybody make fun of him. His family talks about how upset and humiliated he was when somebody put mashed potatoes on his head. Now, as an Irishman, I think that's a waste of good mashed potatoes, but what do I know? So Trump didn't attend the dinner in 2017, 18, or 19. And now, when he's come back to finish up the bad work that he didn't succeed in doing in his first run as president, he's not attending this year. He did not attend this year either. Now, this year the association said it wouldn't have a comedian appear. Now, keep in mind who they've had before who was not vetoed by the president, if you will. Herr Trump, he will be obeyed. The association had something to say about who sits where and you want an indication about how powerful and how much they're in tune with the needs of the press corps, they didn't really fight for the Associated Press, who merely had refused to talk about the president's preference for the Gulf of America. They wouldn't report it. Why? Because it's not true. It's false. It's BS. It is the kind of, well, psychotic behavior of a delusional president. You know, that old thing that we ran into as kids is that the emperor has no clothes. Well, that's exactly what we're dealing with. Excuse me if I'm wiping my face, in part because the no-see-ums are out a little bit today, and so you can't see them, and I can't always see them, but I can feel them. I mean, consider who were the past entertainers. They had Bob Hope, they had Frank Sinatra, they had Duke Ellington, they had James Cagney, Peter Sellers, George Carlin, Jay Leno, Conan O'Brien, Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Kimmel, Trevor Noah, Colin Jost. I mean, they had, and others, and they had quite an array. But in February of this year, they announced Amber Ruffin would be the featured comedian. And the association president, Eugene Daniels, announced she would be terrific. And I think she was going to be the first black woman entertainer to appear. So what happened on the way to the annual dinner? Well, what happened was the White House didn't want her. And she had given an interview saying that, the association had come to her and said, you got to do balance. In other words, they wanted to treat as equivalent to sending people offshore and discriminating and closing down the government as equivalent to what the Democrats are doing. And they're not doing anything at all. In fact, that's part of the, if I were putting together jokes about the Democrats, that would be the joke. So Daniels pulled her as the comedian. And he said it was to ensure the focus is not on the politics of division, which is another way to say the false equivalence of the two parties, if you want to simplify the reference to her comic content if she were to appear. And she had said she would talk about it. And candor, free speech, her opinions is why she was booted by the top journalists in America who cover no less. One of the most important posts you can have is to be a journalist covering the White House and the president. And that's what they were doing. And because the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, Taylor Budovich, criticized her selection, poof, Ruffin is history. Ruffin is history. Now, you might do well to pull up her YouTubes. She's a very good comic. For example, when they changed the name of Mr. Potato Head to Potato Head, and she had a comic bit saying, Potato Head is masculine. You can't do this. That's one brand of her comedy. But there are other things she had to say. So she said, what are you supposed to do? Remain silent when they take away your rights, erase your history, and deport your friends? You're supposed to call it out. But I was wrong. That's what she thought you were supposed to do. That's what she would have done if she'd been there. Now, not only did Daniels do 180 degrees on choosing her, saying she'd be great, and booting her out, saying that it would emphasize political division. But some person went on and said, Well, how can you talk? What could possibly be funny for a comedian to talk about at the dinner? Really? Do you know there's a whole industry in the evening hours of hosts spending, a lot of time talking about comedy involving these characters? I'm sure there'll be a run on the fact that Trump held up a picture of Garcia's tattoo proving that he was a gang member when the picture was manipulated. It's not true at all. And in an interview that the president gave, oh no, that's real. That's real. You're not saying very nice things. I tried to get the reporter interviewing him to change his mind right there on the spot and to participate in the lie of Trump. Now, is there a comic turn on that? Oh, there is. But I don't make my living as a comedian. Maybe I don't make it exercising my independent and free right to say, WTF. How is this possible that you guys who are supposed to cover the White House are afraid to have a comedian underscore the very one-sided effort by the White House to head toward a dictatorship? We couldn't have somebody come out in a uniform saying, I'm a deputy sergeant in the monarchy that's being put together by Trump. So this leads us to think there's a weakness in our coverage. Because if the president says, it ain't so, these people will bow and do what he wants. Is that independent journalism? Is that what Edward R. Murrow would do if he were there today? Talk about this? Would Cronkite do this? Are we winnowing out the courageous, even among our journalists? We have a similar scandal over at 60 Minutes, in which a member of the broadcast team went on to say, we don't appreciate fooling around with our honest coverage. So the Ministry of Truth is having an effect, in part because the journalists don't say, shove it. Don't you tell us how to cover the White House. Empty the room. Cover it like reporters of old used to. Find your sources. Leave the converted pool to a press room to return to being a pool. We don't need a pool of reporters. Maybe we should cover them independently. It appears we already are migrating toward a police state and a broadcast network that is controlled by the state. And Fox was already there. Trump's been spending his time intimidating others into giving us what he wants, and that's not the news. Nothing funny about this. They're right that far. In part because they won't let funny and commentary be what it's meant to be in America. There's this scene in the movie V in which an on-air entertainer is ultimately dragged from his house for entertaining, using the news in a comedic way. Just as every night we're doing. Are we going to see the thing where these people who entertain us at night are not only told by their networks to shove it, but are going to find themselves on a cot in one of the camps, perhaps in Iowa, or maybe it'll be in El Salvador. Who knows? In any case, here's my diagnosis. Trump cowed our press, supposedly covering the president, into doing what he wanted, even though he wasn't going to appear at the dinner. And they show themselves to be false and unreliable, because now we don't know what the truth is, because behind the scenes they're folding and giving up and failing to give us the news as it is, the facts as they are, to inform our intelligence as to how our government is doing and how and when we should support it or criticize it. And the answer is, we have to go out and protest. I'd be going to a rally tomorrow. Not everybody can go to a rally. Write a note, write an editorial, make a phone call, send an email to these loafers in our democracy who act as if it's a self-sustaining system of government, when all history tells us it requires us to commit and to fight for it. And so we shall. And we won't have use for these people who fail us as reporters and independent journalists. So that's what I got to say from the chamber. The chamber. This is a chamber. I don't normally think of it that way. It's a natural chamber. It is among the best things that we can be exposed to, that we can sustain and we can manage. And if we take that ethic from here, even as I'm bitten by these little no-see-ums, to the rest of the actions we can and do take as people and citizens to preserve and protect our freedom, then we got something. These guys are selling hate and money and pressure and coercion. That's not us. That's not American. That's not who we are. So, from the Cathedral of Trees and the Chamber of Justice, I say goodbye. Talk to you tomorrow.